On today's episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show, we're starting a two-part look back at some of the most meaningful conversations that we had this past year. Now, over the next 2 weeks, we're going to count down the top shows of 2025, working our way from number 8 all the way down to the number 1 show of the year. Now, in today's program, we're going to revisit shows ranked 8 through 5, conversations that are going to challenge how we think about grazing management, operational decision-making, long-term commitment, and succession in the cattle business, and what it really takes to keep ranching viable, especially in the face of labor, time, and generational pressures. You're going to hear highlights from discussions on adaptive grazing principles, calving window considerations, where the cattle industry stands today and what's shaping its direction going forward, and how technology and management tools are being used not to replace tradition, but to help operations do more with less. So stick around as we kick off our countdown of the top shows of 2025 on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Hi, everyone, and welcome. This is the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. As you heard there in the opening, we are recapping the top shows of 2025. We've been doing that for the last several years at this time of the year, kind of finishing out each year and doing that. And a lot of folks have found that valuable because maybe they missed a show. And when we recapped it here, they said, oh, man, I got to go back and listen to that. And so, of course, you can find all of our shows by going to our podcast site at workingranchradio.com, or if you have a preferred podcast provider, you can do it through there as well. Now, some of the more recent shows that we did are not going to show up in this top list here for this year's program. However, I did want to mention that more recently we've done some really great shows that are going to probably eventually end up being some of our top shows. In fact, the last episode that we did, episode 236 with Alan Crockett, was Cutting Through the Noise, a great show to kind of get finished up for this year. I encourage you, if you haven't listened to that and want to kind of get a reset for this year and starting into 2026, go and listen to episode 236. Earlier in November, we talked with Lance Zimmerman about, are we seeing a herd rebuilding taking place? A great conversation there. And also in November, we had a 2-part series on virtual fencing. So just some of the shows that we had more recently that I did want to point out. But let's get started. We're going to work our way down from number 8 all the way to number 1. Today it's 8 through 5. And so coming in at number 8 on our top shows of 2025 was episode 216, and it aired on June 7th. My guest for that show was Dr. Alan Williams of Understanding Ag. Now, the title of the show was Tips for Successful Summer Grazing, as we talked about the 10 key things to be aware of as we move through the grazing season. And in the segment that you're going to hear today, Alan explains why grazing management can break down when we get too prescriptive, and why intentional disruption is one of the most important principles to keep in mind. Let's jump into that conversation now.
Yeah, so one of the biggest mistakes we make is making our grazing prescriptive, even when we don't realize it. And often what happens is that we change something, which is a disruption, right? So this is going to lead us into the rule of disruption. So anytime we change something, we have disrupted it. And so we introduced a disruption and we saw a positive impact. But what's our human tendency? Oh, wow.
Do that next year.
A really good positive impact. I did this, so I'm going to do that from now on. That's the silver bullet, right? Well, no. So what we took a disruption, but we made it prescriptive. It worked initially, but then it stops working. Over time, we sort of hit a wall, our progress stops, and then we start going backwards, and we wonder why. Well, I'm doing it the way I did it when it worked. What am I doing wrong now? Well, what you're doing wrong now is you're doing the same thing you did then. That's why in our 3 rules of adaptive grazing, we have the rule of disruption. If we want to make ongoing, continuous progress year after year after year, then we have to make planned, purposeful disruptions and routinely introduce those. And I think the last time I used the analogy of a human athlete.
Yep.
You know, that, and again, I'll just say it one more time to remind people, but, you know, for an athlete, we know that if we do the same exercise routine at the same duration and intensity, again, we're going to hit a wall. And then we're not even going to be able to maintain the same performance. We're going to start going backwards. So every athlete, if they want to continue to progress, knows they have to introduce planned, purposeful disruptions into their exercise routine. So it's no different out here on our farms and ranches. We got to do that. So what are then some of the disruptions we can introduce? Well, one is alter stock density, pounds of animals per acre, not number of head per acre, but pounds of animals per acre. I call it pulsing stock density. So don't pick a stock density. You know, if you hear me or Gabe or Greg Judy or anybody else talking about, well, here we used 100,000 pounds per acre or whatever it may be, and then you think, that's it, 100,000 pounds per acre. I got to keep it at that. No, you just made it prescriptive, and you're going to limit your progress. So, for instance, with us, we go anywhere from about our lowest at 20,000 pounds per acre to 1,000,000 plus pounds per acre. Okay. And they're for different reasons. And the higher the stock density, the shorter the duration.
Yeah.
You know, if I'm at 1,000,000 pounds per acre, it's 30 minutes and that's it. And I'm to the next paddock, right? If it's at 20,000 pounds per acre, I can do that the entire 24-hour period in that paddock. So you got to be cognizant of the impact of the stock density when we're altering stock density. Now, in some Western areas where it's more arid, then a 20,000 pound stock density can at times be pretty high, you know, because your average may be under 5,000 or even under 2,000 pounds.
Yeah.
So it's all relative to where you're at. Another disruption is alter the rotation. So oftentimes when we come out of winter, we start in the same pasture every year, right? And make the same rotation. Well, next year, start in an entirely different pasture, you know, than where you started in this year. Or completely reverse your rotation. Go around the ranch the other way, okay? In your rotation. So alter rotation. Another is altering time or season of the year that I'm grazing in a particular area. And again, if we alter our rotation, then we're going to almost automatically alter the time or season of year. So I'm really sort of combining two disruptions into one. So don't always hit the same pasture in May, as an example, okay? Another is alter rest period. And way too many violate this. You know, they have almost the same rest periods time after time after time, no matter how long that rest period is, but intentionally alter the rest period. If you want to grow more diversity, you want to grow more rooting depth and root biomass and more forage biomass, you've got to give some longer rest. Okay? That's really going to be important.
Yeah.
Another disruption is to alter the height on and height off. In mid-grazing, you know, management-intensive grazing, we're taught always go on at this height and come off at this height. Well, no, that's highly prescriptive, and you're going to limit the ability of those pastures to produce. So alter height on and off. Other disruptions are things like planned burns, bale grazing, contour grazing, okay, where instead of grazing up and down contour, I graze across the contour, I follow the contour. And if I'm contour grazing, I'm always going to start low and move high. I'm not going to start up on the ridge and move down. Okay. Why? Because over the decades and centuries, we've had a lot of erosion and stuff, and we've got more carbon and more diversity and more biology low than we do high. So I want to use my livestock as a transport tool to move that back up. Okay. So start low and go high. Another one is alter direction of my paddocks. So as I'm building paddocks, let's say I've been building them east to west, next year build them north and south within the same bigger pasture in my subdivisions. Another is alter paddock shape or configuration. I don't get the same impact in a square paddock as I do in a long, narrow paddock. I'm going to have a different impact, even with the same acreage in the paddock and the same stock density. The animals move in a circular pattern in a square paddock, and they move back and forth and a long, narrow paddock. So paddock shape matters a lot. And then I can combine disruptions. So for instance, I can alter stock density, I can alter rest period, and I can alter paddock shape or configuration all in the same grazing event. So I've combined 3 disruptions into one grazing event, and that gives me even more impact and results at the end. So, you've got all of these different types of disruptions that we can implement and utilize, and we want to be cognizant of what disruption we use when. And next year, when we're back in that same area, I want to use a different disruption than I used the prior year. What we have found, Justin, in doing this, Gabe and I and others, in doing this for 30 years plus now, when we use this rule of disruption and we're routinely introducing these without becoming prescriptive, we have not hit a wall. We are continuing to make incremental, ongoing progress.
And again, that was just a part of that conversation that we had with Dr. Alan Williams as we were talking about tips for successful summer grazing. So much more we talked about than what you heard there. I encourage you to go and download that one. That was episode 216 that aired on the 7th of June. The show coming in at number 8 on the top shows of 2025. We're going to take a break here and get to the show that come in at number 7. Here's a hint. We're talking calving windows. We'll be back after this. In a world of variables that are beyond our control, there's a tool that can provide certainty for your breeding program. I'm talking about Igenity Beef. It's the first genomic profile designed for crossbred commercial cattle. Now, here's a tool that's going to utilize DNA to rank the genetic merit for 17 key traits, from maternal to performance to carcass traits, as well as mitigate risk factors, for example, like congestive heart failure. It's time to take the gamble and the waiting game out of your breeding program. Make accurate decisions with confidence and uncover your herd's potential with Igenity Beef. To learn more, contact your Neogen representative today or visit neogen.com/Igenity-beef.
Raising and feeding cattle is a high-stakes game. Respiratory disease only raises the risks. Choosing Resflor Gold, Florfenicol, and Flunixin Meglamine from Merck Animal Health as your BRD treatment helps shift the odds. The fast-acting dual therapy reduces fever and fights infection at the source for visible recovery within 6 hours. Don't gamble with BRD. Bet on gold. Learn more at resflorgold.com. Animals intended for human consumption must not be slaughtered within 38 days of treatment. This product is not approved for use in female dairy cattle 20 months of age or older, including dry dairy cows.
We're counting down the top shows of 2025. Before we jump to number 7, I did want to mention one I'm going to throw in the honorable category for top shows of the year is episode 220, Making the Most Out of Your Profit with Dallas Mount. A great show to go back and listen to, especially I know for a lot of folks with these record high calf prices, we want to be wise in what we're doing with those profits in our business. If you want to go back and listen to that show, it was episode 220 with Dallas Mount. Let's get to the show that came in at number 7 in 2025. It was episode 230 that aired on the 11th of October, entitled Rethinking Your Calving Window. As Dr. Bob Larson from Kansas State University walks us through taking a practical look at adjusting the calving window. We walk through the factors producers need to weigh when analyzing the optimal calving time for their operation, from weather and forage to labor, costs, and markets, and the key trade-offs that ultimately determine what works best for each operation. Let's jump into that conversation on calving windows with Dr. Bob Larson. You listed out about 5 different areas when you might look at when a calf could be born, and all of those have a different answer. So let's work through those. First one we've already identified a little bit, that being weather.
Right. Yeah. So some of the questions you might ask yourself are, if I could pick, when would I most like the calves to be born, just from the calving weather standpoint? Then the next question is, when would I like my calves to be born to really match that cow lactation with abundant forage? So that's another answer. Then you start asking, well, when would I like that cow to be bred? And that might be particularly important as we move farther south. You get into humidity, you get into fescue, those types of things. Bull performance, cow performance, probably too. really goes down during the hottest days of the year. So that's in consideration. Well, then you think also about the prices of these calves. So the cyclical nature of weaned calf prices and the cyclical nature of both fed cattle prices and yearlings. There's an optimum time if you go back kind of to a steady growth rate of when those calves were born. And what I've kind of found is that'll give you a complicated answer because those don't align where the very best calving season doesn't necessarily align with the very best forage production or the best calf prices or the best yearling prices. And so you do have to do a little bit of trade-offs and identifying what's optimum. And then we didn't really even get into some of the things like labor. So if you're in a diversified farming operation and you have to calve cows out at the time when you're, planting and harvest are the two busiest times for a diversified operation. And so those labor constraints go into it. So there's a lot of those factors that I think should enter your mind as you're trying to kind of optimize of all those factors, what's going to be the best for me.
Mm-hmm. I think in some of this, as you're going through that, Dr. Larson, is the fact of, and you mentioned it there, labor, but even those folks that aren't in a diversified farm operation, labor sometimes the unaccounted for cost that we really don't analyze.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll go back to the tight calving window. Personally, I'm pretty enthused at the beginning of calving season, and the days aren't quite as long and the work's not quite as hard, and it gets longer and harder as the time goes along. That's another reason if I've got a lot of my calving out of the way in 21 to 30 days, it changes my labor distribution. Yes, I have to work really hard, but it's for, 4, 5, 6 weeks. And then there's only a few more cows to calve, and versus being really at a steady pace for 2 or 2.5, 3 months. I think that's something also to consider, that part of the labor management is getting them front end loaded so that I can, if I need additional labor, be it family or hired, but they're just really during that first 30 days when most of the cows are calving, and then we can kind of adjust labor as you get down to the rest of the cows.
Mm-hmm. Let's go through those 5 questions you have to ask yourself. And I'm sure you've had producers ask you, okay, I get it. I understand those 5 things you just mentioned there, from weather to, getting those cows to rebreed, to time of the year, getting them bred back, marketing, whether you're going to sell them as weaned calves or whether you're retaining ownership. Now walk me through or that conversation with somebody to say, okay, here's how we weight that, or how would you then go to that next step and say, okay, yeah, we got to analyze that, but then work me through as a rancher. How do I figure that out?
Yeah, I think you have to have a handle on your cow costs, because when I'm saying there's 2 things. There's the labor part of, I have low labor when cows are out grazing grass, and peak nutrition. And so in the cow's yearly production cycle, her highest nutrient demands are during early lactation. The first 3 months of lactation is really where a lot of that demand is. And the more I can make that easy from a labor standpoint and easy from a balancing her nutritional needs, the better I'm off from that standpoint. And usually that's also the least expensive way to deliver those nutrients is through grazed growing forage, not grazed dormant forage. So again, it's a little bit different of what months that is, but it's kind of like the peak growing season. So for Kansas, that'd be last part of May through June. First part of July is really kind of the peak time for forage in a lot of part of the country. And again, it's going to be different other places. And if I could have her in peak lactation during that time, I'm not taking bales out. I'm not taking a lot of supplement out. So that's a labor saving. And the green grass is really supplying the nutrients that she needs so that she can perform the way we want her to. She can maintain her body condition. She can give that calf the milk that she has the genetic ability to give. And we really kind of align that. So if you're saying, so in my part of the world, so in Kansas, that would be, and a lot of times our leases might start May 1 or something like that. So you're aligned where you're actually calving maybe just a little bit before that. So we've got some of our calving out of the way before we go to grass in early to mid-May, and then finish off calving out there. And we have really decreased the amount of hay and supplement that I'm handling. So the idea being my cow costs per calf weaned is lower. Now, one other thing that we didn't really talk about is what size calf are these? So if I want the heaviest calf, well, they're just born earlier. So one way to have really heavy calves in October is to have them born in January. But my feed cost to support that cow while she's in high lactation. So she's going to be in high lactation right in the middle of winter, which increases my cow cost. So yes, I'm weaning a bigger calf, but my cow cost is also higher. So that's why I start with, you got to know what your cow costs are. And I will throw some examples. In southern Kansas, you can have winter wheat. So that's a nice growing forage. That would change my answer for somebody that had, an annual green growing forage in the wintertime in some parts of the country. Well, then that's green growing forage, and that matches well with early lactation. So I'll just be blunt. I really don't like taking hay to a high lactating cow.
Yeah, and that's I've got a little tally mark here. That's 2 times you've made that.
I might say it a couple more times.
That's okay, because I think, and I wrote this down here too, and you went right into it, and that was cow costs / feed costs is one of the elements that we have to really analyze in this, that I think is really going to point that arrow a specific direction. When you understand the cow costs and what hay is right now, I mean, it ranges depending on the area you're at. If you've been in a drought area, of course, it's more expensive. If it's been a wet year for you, your hay is probably a little less costly. Nevertheless, let's just figure $150 a ton to up to $200 a ton for hay, and if you're running 4 ton of hay through that cow, there's a lot of your profitability that is lost in that 650 pound calf.
Yeah. That is really true. It's not all about just the income side. You got to balance the income side with the expense side. And so that's a really important thing to keep in mind. I'll throw out a couple of reasons why some people do like calving really early, at least in my part of the country, really early in the year. And that's, January, February, first part of March, is that does align pretty well with some pretty high calf prices, particularly if I wean just a little bit early. And then the other thing, if I retain ownership all the way through slaughter, and I'm kind of going for that right after the first of the year calf value, that early calving cow kind of fits that as well. So I'm a little bit cautious, basically, to lecture someone else on when to calve if they've got it figured out for their system. But they need to consider all the expenses. And I've given you a couple of reasons on the income side, where some of those early calving cows really do generate a lot of income, but they also have, in my opinion, a lot more expense.
Yeah. One other factor, real quick, we'll hit this, and to kind of go down this road of giving a few folks maybe an exception to the rule in what we're talking about here today. You'd mentioned it already. Sometimes diverse operations that are farming and ranching do that from a labor standpoint. We get that. We've identified that. In our particular area where we have a lot of public ground, there are permits that folks are needing to hit by a certain time of the year. And the last thing you want to do is drop in either a cow that hasn't calved, especially if it's a really wooded area, timber country. Right. Now, if it's open country, it might be a little bit different. But if it's timber country, it might be a little different. You want to stick a calf in there and a cow and a pair that's a little older.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and then the other one that doesn't affect me where I live so much, but in areas where you've got federal lands and a lot of times you're putting multiple herds out there, there's a constraint. You can't take bulls out there. And so breeding has to be done by the time your lease starts. So that throws everything I've been talking about. You have to meet the needs of your grazing lease. And so all of those are exceptions and factors that you do have to consider. And I'll kind of come back to something we said earlier. If I can have a relatively tight calving season, the vast majority of my calves have a little bit of age on them by the time we turn out. There'd be a few that are younger, and I just take that as the cost of doing business. But if there's a lot that are younger, that makes me a little more nervous.
And again, that was Dr. Bob Larson. As the title of that show, it was Rethinking Your Calving Window, just a portion of that conversation. And if it's been something that you sort of toyed around with and thinking about that, a lot of practical advice in that conversation from Dr. Larson. That was episode 230 that aired on the 11th of October, the show coming in at number 7 of our top shows of 2025. The number 6th ranked show coming in next, more of a show a little bit more philosophical, so to speak. Find out what that is coming up next.
Calving season is a favorite time of year, but along with that special time are dangers, extra stress, and increased labor. Safety Zone calf catchers are all about safety and making processing new calves easier. Designed for ATVs or UTVs, one person can do the job and never be threatened by the protective mother cow. Make this and every calving season safer and easier with a Safety Zone calf catcher. Watch videos and customer testimonials or order yours today at safetyzonecalfcatchers.com or call 877-505-0914. Affordable and made in the USA. Make your upcoming and all future calving seasons safer, easier, and stress-free. Durable and designed to work anywhere you can drive your ATV or UTV. Order online at safetyzonecalfcatchers.com or call 877-505-0914 today.
Your herd needs protein. When the seasons shift, so do your herd's protein needs. SmartLick protein tubs deliver consistent nutrition that drives performance, helping cattle make the most of available forages, maintain condition and power through winter efficiently, giving you peace of mind. Feed smarter, not harder. Go to smartlick.com. That's smartlic.com to find your dealer.
Well, it was the show that came in at number 6 of our top shows of 2025, returning as a guest as we had him before. In fact, if I remember right, the interview that I did with him in 2024 came in one of the top shows of 2024. But Dr. Neville Spear returned as our guest for an episode titled Markets, Mandates, and Mortality. It was episode 231, and it aired on the 18th of October. Now, in that conversation, Dr. Spear took a wide-angle look at the cattle business that we see today, from markets and consolidations to country of origin labeling, consumer demand, and the long-term outlook for the industry. In this segment that we're going to hear today, we zero in on one of the deeper threads of that discussion: long-term commitment, succession, and the hard decisions producers face when it comes to legacy, mortality, and staying in the business for the next generation. You made a really good comment, and just that if you're going to stay in the cattle business after where this market's at now, you're committed for the next 20 years, kind of a thing. And that was sort of a conversation. Expand on that, what your thoughts are when you say that.
Yeah, I think if you haven't kind of given up by now, you're not going to give up. And ultimately, I see producers, what they're doing is they've really sold off kind of the bottom end of their cows. They've made the cow herd better. They're buying better bulls. They're really committed to this business. They've probably replaced some equipment. They've done some other things to improve their productivity, maybe lease some other ground. They're in it solidly for the next 20, 25, 30 years. They're making a commitment. This is a long run business. They see that. Otherwise, I think they'd pretty much be gone by now.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really an interesting perspective in our business, that probably we're not going to grow cow numbers a whole lot, but we also may see less decline going forward. So we may kind of just flatten out here. We kind of maybe eliminate the cattle cycle, right? And a little, it doesn't look like it did 20 years ago, 30 years ago, where we have these 10-year kind of loops that we used to do.
Yeah.
But by the way, the other part of that is, one thing we didn't talk about earlier is just debt structure. What have you done in terms of your debt structure and to manage that? And that's a pretty big undertaking. If you're in this business, you're going to stay in and you're really trying to manage your debt too.
Yeah. That's definitely the other side of some of this. I think when you say something about, and I want people to think through this, we have that conversation, we say that phrase of, people are committed for the next 15, 20, 25 years. That's not necessarily one guy. That gets us in maybe a good segue into the next conversation about generational. I mean, that could be somebody that's in their 40s, 50s, and, maybe a son or daughter coming back in 10 to 15 years, committing, that operation to that far out. And so this whole element of estate planning and of course, succession planning really is a top 1 or 2 points when it comes to why we're losing family ranches.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Justin. So at the end of the day, right, really a ranch is a family business. And those always bring complexities with them. And unfortunately, a lot of times, and I've seen it, and I've been in the room with families where they just haven't had the hard conversations. And then by the time it needs to happen, it's too late. And so really a lot of ranches that are going forward, and I would say farms too, right? It's the same principle. They've had those hard conversations, and there is a young person coming back and they've made a commitment. And by the way, I go out and do a lot of producer meetings. I'm seeing more and more of those 30, 35-year-old people, and they're always the ones that come up afterwards and want to ask questions, right? They're hungry. But the family business, it's not a person. The business is committed going forward, and they're going to try to make that happen for them. So, yeah, but it's always the avoidance of the hard conversation, and it's right, the succession planning, or how are we going to split it up if we have to? And boy, those get emotional. And money and emotion are inherently tied, and it's often very hard to separate. And a lot of times I just tell people, you need to get some help with this and some outside third-party perspective, because it can be really challenging.
Neville, I'm going to ask you, you're not afraid to just throw it out there as far as just the bare naked truth of something. Give me the bare naked truth about succession planning. And you talked about, it's hard conversations, but I mean, the other side of it is what do we need to get over and just get it done? I mean, seriously, I feel like, we've beat the horse. It's hard. Yeah, we all know that. And I know it's hard. I get it. I know it. I've been through one, going through another one. I get it. But let's take the gloves off on this conversation.
We all think we're going to live forever. And we forget a lot of times that, gosh, I can jump in a tractor today and have an accident, and right, I'm not here tomorrow. Death is real, and that means if I'm going to face my own mortality, then I also need to deal with my relationships in the family and inside the business. And a lot of times we just don't want to face that. We keep putting it off and putting it off and putting it off until ultimately it doesn't happen. And unfortunately, it's very damaging emotionally, but it's also costs a lot of money, right? A lot of equity ultimately gets lost in that, right? So what we want to do is say, you know what, this could happen. Because it does, right? And you've heard stories where, right, it does happen. And you go, oh, I wish they had done this. And so, really it's about facing ourselves and our own mortality, and then maybe some of the challenges that we have inside the family, and we need to try to heal that. Yeah.
This is not necessarily your expertise. And last week we had on our program, we did talk about a legal perspective on estate planning. We had an attorney on out of Oklahoma that kind of went through estate planning, giving us that legal perspective. And I'm not asking you to provide that necessarily here today, but when you look at the setup for what you're seeing as far as these ranching operations and or farming operations that are being successfully transferred to the next generation, what's just some takeaways from their structure, their setup that you could share and offer folks? Is there anything that you've seen, that just a couple points, and maybe not everything that's out there, but just a couple things, some takeaways that you've seen that work?
Well, they truly approach it as a business. Okay. It is a family business, but okay, we're going to set that aside. It's a business. And then we begin to think about every single contingency. And then the other part of that is there's transparency. Everyone that's somehow involved or engaged inside of the family business, the farm, the ranch, they all know what's happening. They all know their place. And then therefore they can make a very respectful decision. Hey, yes, I want to be here and stay here and be a part of it, or no, I'm going to leave and I'm going to go find something else. And everyone can kind of manage that on good terms. So I'd say it's those two parts. We're going to deal with it, every contingency that could happen. Okay. And then we're going to be very transparent in it.
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful. I think that's good.
Everyone needs to be involved in the decision making. Yeah. Now that doesn't mean everyone gets their way. Right. But everyone needs to be involved and to know, and that way you don't get into these kind of weird scenarios. And by the way, that's how you keep the attorneys out of it. In the event that something happens or someone unexpectedly dies. Yeah.
Okay, real quick before we head to break, there's one thing I wrote down here that you had mentioned about that's going to be important as folks that are going to stay in and looking for the next 15, 20, 25 years out, and that was debt restructure. Real quick, let's go back to that, because I want you to, can you just expand on that a little bit more, and how that's going to play into this?
Well, I mean, clearly we've had a lot of uncertainty here about interest rates in the last couple of years. And I think no doubt that's played on producers' minds. And especially if you've got to kind of make some investment in new equipment, right, whatever it is, and you got to need to rebuild a bunch of fence, you've got a lot of deferred maintenance. Boy, we're going to think about that. But ultimately, I think one of the biggest challenges that a lot of producers get into is they don't have enough working capital. And then that kind of backs itself into we've got too much debt or not the right kind of debt with the right kind of duration. So I'm always encouraging producers, and especially right now, Justin, right? We're creating more profit than ever. Let's be very, very mindful about what we do with that. I always say, part of it, take it and enjoy it. You earned it. Okay. But the other part is let's buy down some debt, and then also let's have some more working capital. Because, for example, when the engine blows up and you've got to go spend $10,000 to get the engine replaced or whatever it is, you don't have to go to the bank and ask them. Because the next time you go to the bank and ask them, and then you ask for the next thing, and boy, next thing you've run out of money and you run the course, and now I've got to start selling things, and you don't want to do that. So managing your debt and then working capital, two really essential parts of kind of the long run business going forward.
And again, that was just part of that conversation that we had with Dr. Neville Spear. It was episode 231 that aired the 18th of October, entitled Markets, Mandates, and Mortality. The other segments included him talking not only about what he sees and forecasts in the marketplace, but also we got into some hot button topics like country of origin labeling and animal identification and consumer demand. A lot of those kinds of things that are definitely big in our industry right now. And we wrapped it all up with where he sees the market, some optimism that he sees in our industry as a whole. So the show that came in at number 6 for 2025, it was episode 231, entitled Markets, Mandates, and Mortality with Dr. Neville Spear. We're going to get into the show that came in at number 5 as we were talking about how to do more with less. Find out what that is coming up next.
It all starts with a tag. Identifying each animal allows you to better manage the entire herd and control your operation's future. For nearly 70 years, producers have chosen Allflex for individual animal management. With Allflex, you get the most trusted portfolio of ID solutions. Whether you need stock or custom visual tags, electronic tags, tissue sampling units for DNA collection, or syringes, bring the Allflex advantage to your operation today. Visit allflexusa.com to learn more.
We're finally at the show that lands in the number 5 spot for our top shows of 2025. It was episode 228, which aired on the 20th of September, as it featured Chip Kemp, who is the Chief Strategy Officer with 701X. Now, in our conversation, we talked about what's doing more with less really mean in today's cattle business and how technology is beginning to show up on ranches, not as a replacement for tradition, but as a way to support it. In this segment we're going to hear now, Chip lays the groundwork for that discussion, focusing on legacy, stewardship, and why every generation has to find new ways to keep ranching viable.
So to me, when we start talking about some of these things, it can get kind of heady, kind of fast, and that's unintentional. So I like to keep it simple because I'm a simple hillbilly and it's good for me. And really where I see these things is through the prism of technology enhancing tradition. We value the tradition and we value the culture. And I have yet to meet a cattle producer whose primary goal is well beyond dollars. It's well beyond stuff. It is there a snowball's chance that my kids or grandkids can keep my name, my brand on that piece of dirt? Can they keep it on the gate? And so let's recognize that and embrace it and accept it and respect it. Now, there are a heck of a lot of challenges. And if we continue, there's also not a grandfather I've met who thinks his kids or grandkids can do this the same way and stay in business 20 years from now. So we have various technological tools that come to play. They're used all over the place. Very simple analogy. My mother lives alone in the same farmhouse I grew up in. Why is it that us boys require her to wear an Apple Watch? So that we can know her safety, her things that are going on in her life, and feel like we're being responsible stewards as best we can. Same basic premise. How do we do that here? And so when I joined the 701X team, It kind of came out of the blue when they approached me one day, and I've known each other mostly from my time in the breed association space and the genetic evaluation space, of which I'm still very, very close to and work with daily. But in those spaces, we had so many data points, but sometimes we didn't have the tool that encompassed those data points into an actionable item that could solve a pain point for somebody. And that's where, when I came in touch with the folks at 701X, it's like, you all are actually solving problems like every day. That's what you do. You address different problems with different value propositions from a different seat, and we change lives. And that may sound a little bit hyperbolic, but I can give you many examples of how that's true. And so what does 701X specifically do? 701X makes a suite of wearable devices. It's a fancy name for fancy tags that we can utilize in cattle all across the U.S. and in other places as well. And it allows us to recognize that cows don't talk the language we talk. But this tag allows us to communicate with them in a way that we can understand when they're eating, when they're ruminating, when they're walking, when they're resting. We get a variety of health alerts. We understand, we can see estrus information, we can see mounting information. And so we know where they're at any point in time. The basic point is anywhere in North America, they can connect either cell or satellite. So we actually know where they're at. And a lot of times that's enough. But in many cases, there's a whole suite of things that we'll kind of elaborate on it during the conversation. So that to me was the difference, was we were able to start taking all the decision and data points that I've been so excited about my whole career and put them in tangible action steps that gives a push to somebody's phone who's in their pocket. Even if they want to pretend like that phone's not in their pocket, you and I know the reality is it is. And so now it's boiling all these things down into answers, solutions that address problems.
Yeah. It's interesting, Chip, when I asked you that question a bit ago, and I wrote down here, solve a problem, just about the moment that came out of your mouth. And I see where precision technology, as you and I alluded to when we were talking before we went on air, a lot of times we've seen it first evolving in the farming industry, but we're seeing it now definitely more in the ranching industry in various aspects, with ear tags being one of those methods. Solving a problem is where I see this being evolving from. But one of the concerns I've got, and I see this, of course, with social media being so much more prevalent today than it was years ago, then you have more conspiracy theory out there of things, of people throwing ideas. Well, this is why they're doing it. They're doing this so that the government can do that for, against us. And I look back to this particular and some of the things that I see, and we're going to talk about later on, is really let's throw that out right here in this conversation today, because it really is about what can we do with this technology to solve some problems.
Amen, Justin. And so, first of all, let me throw out anybody who has an interest in knowing how we think and how we operate. This is an open invitation. The office is downtown, Fargo, North Dakota. I assure you, any and everybody are welcome. I'd ask you to call first, but if you don't, so be it. And the beauty is, what you're going to see is the mentality is this suite of products that 701X generates, that includes the wearable devices, but also includes what I firmly believe, and this comes with some life experience, to be the most robust herd management system that exists on the planet. But that herd management integrates into registry and eval information, so it becomes an ecosystem. Okay, so it isn't good software, good hardware. We're ranchers. We don't care about that stuff. We just want solutions. And so these are an integrated approach where you just wrap hardware and software together. Everything is a U.S. made product by a passionate team of folks who are put together by a gentleman, Kevin Bifford, our founder, who he's as enthusiastic about supporting the independent beef producer as anybody you will meet. So to your direct question, the proposition here is there are numerous problems within our business that each of us can recognize, and we don't all face the same ones. But if we can address those things, whether it is the fact that it's taken way too long to put some of these precision ag tools in place in the beef business, right? I get it. I dream of the day I can smash my iPhone with a hammer. Let's be practical. That's not going to happen, right? And so it's not going to get to happen, because that's the world we live in now. We can pretend and we can want it to be something else. But if we do that, then we set our kids and grandkids up for failure, because it's not the way they're going to get to operate. And these tools are prevalent in nearly every other business. And to your point, they're becoming very prevalent in ours. And so it allows us to make this more profitable for us in the near term, more manageable, and it gives a roadmap for potentially successive generations to go, that looks a little bit more appealing, because all of a sudden mom and dad are able to use some just normal tools. And instead of working 30 hours a day, 8 days a week, they start to look like they're having a slightly normal life. And that looks appealing to me. So that's really the play.
Yeah. As you were talking about that, Chip, I was thinking, and you referenced back before about, and I know this is going to lead us past a little bit more time than we wanted to go in this segment, but I think it's important to hit this, because one of the things you mentioned about, there's a generation now that wants to be able to pass this to the next generation, pass that ranch name on and that ground on to the next generation. I believe with where the price of real estate is getting, that we have to find other ways that we can become efficient and become profitable. And it's going to be in labor savings. It's going to be in better ROIs on the investments we already have in those places, in order for us to compete with the folks that do have the money that can go spend, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 on ranch land. I'm saying ranch land. That's not farmland, because all the farmers say, I'd pick that up in a minute. I'm saying ranch land that's out here at where it takes 40 acres to run a cow, where they can spend $3,000, $4,000 an acre. We can't do that and run a cow on it. So getting back to your deal about this, I think that's where some of this technology, we're going to have to look at it and have some willingness to embrace it.
Yeah, exactly. Because either we acknowledge the reality of things and we choose to do something about it. We, meaning maybe the mythical industry at large, but maybe it's just we, meaning an individual family who looks at the dynamic and says, we can sit and just watch, we can just manage decline. Right? Yeah, we're making a lot of money right now, but we also see the underlying components of folks who don't see a path forward, saying, hey, this is the time to tap out, right? Now's the time to sell cows. We know, let's face it, we're going to be at 25 million cows in the not real distant future. And you and I will be long since dead before this country ever sees 30 million beef cows again. And so for some of the reasons you mentioned, prices, land prices and the like. And so either we find ways to embrace these things and give ourselves an opportunity to do it a little different. Right? If we're doing it like the neighbor, guess what? We're probably doing it wrong. So can we look at things where, for example, these tags can give us a very intense grazing map, to your point, something very simple. Mm-hmm. What if we found that through these very intensive grazing maps, there's large swaths of ground that we have, for some reason, the cows are not utilizing? Let's rectify that, or get rid of that piece of ground, or give it a different usage, right? Mm-hmm. Because now we can start to carve back. Maybe it's digital awareness of estrus alerts coming to your phone on a set of heifers, or even more concerning, maybe estrus alerts coming back at a time when the female should be bred. Maybe it's awareness of what our bull is doing, and we'll talk more about that certainly in an upcoming segment. Those things that hugely impact our day-to-day lives. And we're able to monitor those 24/7 and get feedback when we're at our kids' ball game, when we snuck away for the county fair, or when we're just asleep. We're getting awareness of what's going on that maybe offsets some of the need for yet another hired hand that's difficult to find, difficult to source, and more difficult to even keep, or yet another vehicle to run up and down the road just to blow tires and diesel off. So that's kind of what we're looking at, to exactly your point. How do we better utilize what we have to ensure our own sustainability?
That was just a portion of that conversation that we had with Chip Kemp of 701X that aired on the 20th of September in episode 228. It was a show entitled Doing More with Less, as we talked about technology on the ranch, justifying that, and of course the ROI on that. And as I said earlier, not to replace traditional agriculture, but as a way to support these ranches so that we can see these ranches passed on to the next generation. A great show. I encourage you to go back and listen to episode 228 that aired in September of this year. It's the show that came in at number 5 on the top shows of 2025. We're going to put a pause for this week, and next week we'll pick up with the remaining top 4 shows of 2025. But coming up next, we're going to hear from meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-range weather.
Fascinated by our wild weather? Now you can learn, appreciate, and understand the weather in your own backyard with the new Tropo Rain Gauge. Having achieved the highest rating of any product reviewed by the weatherstationexperts.com, the Tropo boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit measurerain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to measurerain.com.
Today's Long Range Weather brought to you by Long Range Cattle Dewormer with 150 days of parasite protection in just one single dose. To find out more, their website is longrangedewormer.com. Well, as we turn now and take a look at our long-range weather, joining us is meteorologist Don Day. And Don, it's been some wild and wacky weather all across the country, mainly probably really, when you think about it, more in the northern tier from the Pacific Northwest all the way through the northern tier with rain and everything in the northwest to wind in the middle of the country and just really odd kind of weather.
Yeah, it's been an odd December for sure. I mean, we've had everything. We've had record-breaking cold, a lot of snow in the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes, and New England, several episodes of sub-zero temperatures. And then you mentioned we've had flooding in Washington State. We've had above average temperatures across the South and across a large part of the Rockies. We've had multiple high wind events. We've had a couple of blizzards thrown in. And again, you mentioned the northern tier, and that's really been the case. The northern states with a dip into the upper Midwest and the Great Lakes and the Corn Belt is where the winter weather has been the most active, but it's really been holding there, really holding firm. And we had last week freezing temperatures go to all the way to the Gulf Coast, but it was transitionary. It was brief. So the northern tier of the U.S. has been having a lot of winter. There are other parts of the United States that are going, where's winter?
Yeah. So to answer that question, as we look at the next 7 to 10 days out, that's going to move us through this Christmas week and before we get into the new year, what do you see for the weather across? Let's start kind of in that northern tier that's really been hit hard.
Well, first of all, there's good news for those of the folks in the northern plains and the upper Midwest that would like to have a little bit of relief from the cold. While there will be a couple of cold fronts coming through between now and Christmas, overall, from the southern and central Rockies into the central and northern plains, all the way to a lot of the east, there's going to be some warmer, more mild Pacific air spreading into those areas. So Christmas week is going to be pretty warm and certainly warmer than it's been in those parts of the country.
Mm-hmm. So you had briefly mentioned the fact that the southern part of the country hasn't seen quite the winter that we've seen in other parts. What are they going to see?
Well, with that warmer weather, we don't see much precipitation. Now, the exception is going to be as we get into the far west and far southwest and northwestern areas of the United States, we're going to see a Pacific storm slide into along the west coast. Now, that may feed a little bit of moisture eastward out into the southern tier of the U.S., but for the most part, probably up to New Year's, there really won't be much weather going on in the southeast or the south.
All right. Well, Don, appreciate the update, and we look forward to talking to you next week.
Sounds good.
And that was meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-range weather. You can tune in each and every morning to his daily video podcast by going to his website and getting a link to his YouTube channel at dayweather.com. Today's long-range weather brought to you by Long Range Cattle Dewormer. Tune in next week as we wrap up our countdown of the top shows of 2025. The Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. Thanks for joining us. I'm Justin Mills. And until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.